just 1/2 of a teaspoon of one specific natural compound, can rival the anti-inflammatory effect of ibuprofen, and most people have absolutely no idea this exists, or how powerful it really is, because when they hear the word turmeric, they immediately think of a yellow spice sitting in their kitchen cabinet that they sprinkle on food and forget about. But what I'm talking about here is not culinary turmeric, and it's definitely not something you casually dust over eggs and expect miracles from, because turmeric is simply the delivery vehicle, and the real star of the show is a compound inside it called curcumin, which is where nearly all of the anti-inflammatory, pain-reducing, and protective effects come from. And here's the critical thing most people miss. Curcumin in its natural state is absorbed extremely poorly by the body. So taking turmeric powder alone is like owning a high-performance engine, but never putting fuel in it. Which is why people try turmeric once, feel nothing, and dismiss it as useless, when in reality they were never using it in a form capable of producing a physiological effect. And this confusion is made worse by the internet, because so many videos overcomplicate this topic with intimidating biochemical terminology, complex signaling cascades, and diagrams that leave people more confused than when they started, when in fact the core concept is extremely simple. If you understand how inflammation actually works in the body, because inflammation is not one single process, it is controlled by several master switches. And if you want real relief, you need to understand which switches are being turned on, which ones are being turned off, and why certain treatments work temporarily while others create lasting change. And once you grasp this framework, everything suddenly clicks into place. So let me simplify this in a way that actually matters to your daily life, because there are essentially 4 major control dials that regulate pain and inflammation in the human body, and every drug, supplement, or natural compound you've ever heard of works by interacting with one or more of these dials, whether you realize it or not. And the first dial is what I like to call the pain and inflammation factory, because this pathway is directly responsible for producing pain signals and inflammatory compounds at the source. And when this factory is running at full speed, you feel pain, swelling, stiffness, and heat. And the second dial is even more powerful, because it's the master inflammation on switch, meaning when this one is activated, it flips on hundreds of genes that tell your body to stay inflamed, almost like throwing a giant circuit breaker that lights up an entire building. And once this switch is on, inflammation becomes systemic rather than localized, which is why people with chronic inflammatory conditions often feel pain everywhere, instead of just in one joint. And then you have the third dial, which doesn't necessarily create inflammation by itself, but makes it dramatically worse. And this is the inflammation megaphone, because it amplifies inflammatory signals and keeps them loud, persistent, and difficult to shut down. And this is one of the main reasons autoimmune diseases are so difficult to manage, because even when you calm things down, this megaphone keeps shouting. And many of the strongest pharmaceutical drugs for autoimmune conditions are designed specifically to suppress this pathway. And then we come to the fourth and final dial, which is the backup inflammatory alarm system, the one that keeps screaming long after the original threat is gone. And this system exists for survival reasons. But in modern life, it often becomes chronically activated, contributing to asthma, autoimmune flare-ups, lingering joint pain, and inflammatory conditions that never seem to fully resolve. And the reason I'm explaining this is because most treatments only address one of these dials, which is why relief is often incomplete or temporary. So now that you understand the basic framework, let's talk about ibuprofen. Because ibuprofen is very effective at quickly turning down the first dial, the pain and inflammation factory. And that's why it works so fast, and why people rely on it so heavily, because it shuts down the production of pain-causing compounds almost immediately. But here's the trade-off that rarely gets discussed. That same pathway also produces protective substances for your stomach lining and kidneys, and when you shut it down repeatedly, you're not just turning off pain, you're also removing protection, which is why long-term or frequent ibuprofen use is associated with stomach ulcers, gastrointestinal bleeding, kidney stress, and other well-known side effects. And even more important than that, Ibuprofen doesn't touch the other three inflammatory dials at all. It addresses the master inflammation switch. It doesn't quiet the megaphone, and it doesn't silence the backup alarm system, which means the underlying inflammatory environment remains intact. So the moment the drug wears off, the pain comes right back, forcing people into a cycle of repeated dosing. And just to clear up another major misconception, Tylenol doesn't even work on these pathways in the first place, because acetaminophen primarily acts in the brain to dull pain perception, meaning it masks pain without doing anything for inflammation at the tissue level, which is why it can be useful for headaches but ineffective for inflammatory conditions, and why excessive use places strain on the liver rather than the stomach. And aspirin, while often grouped with ibuprofen, also focuses mainly on that first pathway. And while it has cardiovascular benefits in certain cases, blocking this pathway long-term can still lead to stomach irritation and bleeding. So now let's shift gears and talk about turmeric and curcumin.